Lung cancer? You don't even smoke.
Got one of those for me.
One of those what?
Cigarette. Give me one.
For most of Breaking Bad, Walter White lies to everyone, including himself. But what if the first person Walt lied to was us, the audience? What if Walter White was actually a smoker? Welcome to another episode of PEXPOSURE. I'm Pecky, and I like to psychoanalyze myself through the characters I watch in film and TV, and sometimes I just overthink things. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of my episodes.
Do it.
Breaking Bad introduces Walt as a man who feels crushed by his own life. He's broke, undervalued, working as a high school chemistry teacher and at a car wash after school. He also has a baby on the way that he doesn't seem emotionally or financially prepared for. He believes he's smarter than the people around him, but that intelligence hasn't quite given him the respect or life he's wanted. At home, Skylar talks to him like he's another child she has to manage. He has a disabled son. Walter Jr. seems to be more impressed by Hank than by his own father, and at the car wash, Bogdan is constantly taking advantage of him. Then Walt gets diagnosed with lung cancer. Because Walt isn't presented to us as a smoker, the diagnosis feels random and unfair. It makes his already sad life seem even worse. You feel for him before you fully understand the pride, resentment, and ego underneath all of it. But the lung cancer diagnosis has always stood out to me. There's also a moment after Walt tells the family that he has lung cancer where Hank points out that Walt doesn't smoke, and Skylar starts looking for another explanation.
One time you complained about that they didn't give you the right kind of, I don't know, some kind of ventilation hood or something. And
It wasn't that.
Walt immediately tells her it wasn't that. And maybe that's just because he knew proper precautions had been taken in all of those instances. But he sounds pretty certain about what didn't cause the cancer without ever saying what he thinks did. Obviously, non-smokers can get lung cancer too, and if this were meant to be canon, the show probably would have shown us. That's why this is just a theory. I'm just trying to see how his story changes when you look at it through this lens. If you think about it, cigarettes already have an interesting place in the show. Skylar secretly smokes while pregnant. Jesse carries the ricin in a cigarette. Walt later uses that cigarette to manipulate him. Walt also manages to fool the audience through that storyline. When Brock is poisoned, we're led toward the same conclusion Jesse reaches, only to find out that Walt was behind it. He isn't above lying to us, and the show isn't above withholding part of the truth until it's ready for us to see him differently. So, although Walt is never shown smoking, even in flashbacks, the show already connects cigarettes to secrecy, shame, danger, and self-destruction. There could have been a part of Walt's life before the pilot that we never saw and that he never told anyone about. Walt is very invested in his own image. He wants to be seen as decent, responsible, rational, and forced into bad choices by the circumstances outside of his control. He wants to be the man who did something terrible because life gave him no other option. So if there were something private that made the cancer feel less random, I think Walt would bury it. Also, Walt has a habit of replacing the truth with a version that still sounds bad, just never as bad as what he's actually hiding.
And why'd you go and tell her I was selling you weed?
Because somehow it seemed preferable to admitting that I cooked crystal meth and killed a man.
He gives her something believable enough to explain his behavior while protecting the much bigger secret. That pattern continues throughout the show. And he does hide the cancer at first. He doesn't come home from the doctor and tell Skylar what happened. He deals with it alone. Honestly, if there had been a way for him to hide the cancer forever, I think he would have. Maybe part of why he hesitates to tell Skylar is that some part of him feels responsible for it. If Walt had been secretly smoking or privately destroying himself in some other way, telling Skylar about the cancer might feel like admitting he had a hand in it. Because think about it, Walt has been directly involved in so much of what happens throughout Breaking Bad. He manipulates people, rewrites stories, hides the truth, and constantly tries to turn chaos into something he can control. So maybe that pattern goes even further back than cooking meth. Maybe it goes all the way back to before the diagnosis. Now, I don't think Walt planned to get cancer. Cancer is too unpredictable, but maybe he had already been living like someone who had given up on his life.
What would you know about me, Gretchen?
Gray matter is a thing he never got over. Ever since then, Walt has used it to reinforce his belief that he was cheated out of the life he deserved. So where did all that anger live before Heisenberg? Maybe it was already there. Maybe the cancer just gave it a new direction. But it doesn't only come out through cooking. In the pilot, Walt attacks the teenagers who are making fun of Walter Jr., and a few episodes later, he sets that obnoxious guy's car on fire. Neither moment has anything to do with making money for his family. There are moments where feeling disrespected gives Walt an excuse to act on impulses he usually keeps contained. So maybe smoking had been another outlet before any of this, something smaller and more private that let him feel reckless without anyone knowing. Maybe for a few minutes, Walt could hold something dangerous in his hand and still feel like he was the one in control. And honestly, doesn't that feel like something Walter White would do? Throughout the show, Walt is deeply uncomfortable with helplessness.
I feel so sorry for you, Walt.
Fuck you.
School teacher, cancer, desperate for money.
Okay, we're done here.
Even when he hurts himself, he needs the choice to feel like power. That's why this theory kind of works for me emotionally, even though the show never confirms it. If smoking had been Walt's outlet before the pilot, then the diagnosis would completely change the meaning of that outlet. And maybe that's why cooking meth becomes so addictive for him. Smoking may have been Walt swallowing the poison, but cooking became Walt learning how to control it. Before the pilot, maybe the poison was private. It went into his own body. Then, after the diagnosis, the poison became external. He turned it into chemistry, money, and power. And we all know that if this were only about leaving money for his family, he would have stopped when he had the amount he needed. He had so many chances to stop. I mean, he even went into remission at one point. Walt also had another chance to stop with Gus. The original deal was $3 million for 3 months of work. That could have been the end of it. Instead, when those 3 months were almost over, Walt was the one asking what happened next. Gus extended the offer and Walt stayed. By then, it wasn't about reaching a number anymore. It was about wanting to give up the life he'd built as Heisenberg. But Walt's ego is too big for that. And by the end of the show, he finally says the truth out loud.
I did it for me. I liked it. I was good at it. I was alive.
That's why I think there had to be some version of Heisenberg before Heisenberg. Maybe it was smoking, or maybe it was some other private form of self-destruction. But I do think Walt had been carrying that darkness for a long time, and the cancer diagnosis just exposed it. If Walt had any role in the thing that made him sick, even indirectly, then the story becomes more circular. His destruction doesn't start when he decides to cook meth. It may have started earlier, with the private habit that made the diagnosis less random than it first seemed. Maybe the first lie was who Walter White was when we met him. He seemed like a victim of circumstance, and in some ways he was. But he needed us to root for him before we could realize we were rooting for the villain. The way people underestimated him gave us reasons to excuse what came next. By the time it became clear that Walt wasn't just reacting to his circumstances, but using them to justify what he wanted to do, we were already invested in him. Maybe circumstance just made Walter sympathetic enough for us to follow him there. Breaking Bad is framed as a transformation story, but maybe it's also just a story where a man finally gives himself permission to become the person he had been holding back for years.
I am awake.
So that's my theory. Let me know what you guys think. I rewatch Breaking Bad every summer. This thought just came into my head and I needed to talk it out on here. Maybe what we really need is a series showing Walt's origin story. If you enjoy this video, please take a second to like and subscribe if you want to see more videos from me. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys in another video soon. Bye!